Yeah, I'd like to call the Planning Commission meeting of July 14th, 2022 to order. Margie, could go call roll, please.
Mr. Capuzzi?
Present.
Mr. Shannon?
Present.
Ms. Dobbs? Here. Mr. Fiordamondo? Mr. Garrett? Ms. Phillips? Mr. Montresor?
Okay, ask everyone to rise and join in Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with justice for all. Great. Okay, thank you. We only have the one item on our agenda this evening, and that's a continuation of receiving public comment input on the draft comprehensive plan. We have 5 brave souls who are joining us tonight. Thank you for coming. And the floor is open. I'll start on this side of the room. Anybody have any comments they'd like to make about the comprehensive plan? No. Okay. This side? All right. Come to the podium. Give us your name, address, and fire away.
Surprised. I thought there would be a lot more interest this evening.
Well, this is our third meeting
Yeah.
so far this, so it's kind of been dwindling off as we go along.
Right. So my name is Chris Furl, and I have a business at 51 West Eagle Road. So I'm just, in looking over the comprehensive plan draft, I was just a little bit surprised at the amount of attention focused on the West Eagle Road corridor. A couple of comments struck me as unusual. It said large numbers of, there seems to be a preoccupation with the planning efforts in this township to deal with West Eagle Road, and I don't exactly see the problems that some of the efforts seem to be addressing. On page 12, where they begin to address the Eagle Road corridor, they say large numbers of persons responding to the Haverford Township Citizen Survey identified Eagle Road as that being problematic. That's really not true. It's of the 10 business districts, it actually fell as 5th with the attention, with people bringing up issues. So it's not, there doesn't seem to be a groundswell of concern with that particular area. It mentions a couple of things that needed special attention. One that says that it needs to be more attractive. Hands down, absolutely, positively, we win the prize for the ugliest business district in the township. It talks about it needs to be a more functional commercial corridor. I don't know what functional commercial means. West Eagle Road tends to have the lowest vacancy, probably has the highest gross per linear foot of all the businesses in the area. But the thing that seems to get most people's craw is that it's not pedestrian friendly. That's brought up over and over and over again. And I agree, it is not pedestrian friendly. But in December 1992, the Blue Route opened, and that changed West Eagle Road forever. We get 20,000 cars coming down there, and you're not going to get much of a pedestrian-friendly corridor with that much traffic, and we're not going to change that traffic. I mean, it's a reality that needs to be accepted and addressed. And there seems to be like this lofty vision where the township wants West Eagle Road to become like a State Street in Media or kind of the central district in Narberth. They don't suffer from the same kind of vehicle traffic that we do. There's a lot of talk about the township influencing the business mix. The business mix is what it is because those are businesses that are appropriate for that kind of thoroughfare with high traffic. You're not going to get people strolling on boutiques when you have that kind of vehicle traffic around. Whether you put lawn buffers or fancier, better trees, more lighting, people don't want to walk around with those kind of fumes, that kind of vehicle activity. So it just seems to me that the efforts that are proposed to try to change what West Eagle Road is, unless they accept the fact of what it really is and isn't going to change, they're doomed to failure. That's my opinion.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? Oh, you had your turn. You're too late. No, I'm kidding. Come on.
Susanna, before you start, I did want to just let you know, I know that I did not respond to your email. I've been a little slow getting back to those with one hand. I did forward your comments to the commission,
Okay.
so they do have them.
Thanks. Well, thanks so much. On that, I just wanted to apologize to the commission for not having a more formal and informative cover letter to my submission to you. I was anxious to get it to you before the meeting tonight and a little short on time, so I opted for sending it with just an email and with what we did, but I'd be happy to expound if you wanted, either tonight or in a follow-up email on what our suggestions were and our recommendations for changes to the historic preservation portion of the plan.
You're from the
Oh,
historic.
I'm sorry, I'm Susanna Baruco, and I'm the chair of the Historical Commission. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I just printed it out.
yeah, I
Yeah.
know, it was late and sent with haste, so I apologize.
So you're volunteering basically to rewrite that particular section of the
This
comprehensive
was
plan.
rewritten by a group of us on the Historical Commission because we felt that it needed a little building out and a little clarity.
Okay.
And so instead of making a list, we just rewrote it.
Okay. Were you at all contacted by our consultant?
No,
Okay, no one ever touched base with you guys as far as?
no,
Okay.
no.
I mean, I personally don't have any problem with your input into that section, okay?
Yeah.
And, I mean, as long as you're not, doing something too dramatic in here, and I don't think you are.
We didn't really,
One thing that we're concerned about, I think most of us share your concern about integrity of neighborhoods, for lack of a better term, and I think we all would like to see some type of wording put in a zoning ordinance that kind of compels developers, especially with infill development, to try to match some of the historical characters of a particular neighborhood. Now,
right,
unfortunately, each neighborhood is a little district, so it becomes a little difficult. We had a situation over at Manor Road where the folks were upset over there because their houses were all the same.
Yep.
And the new developer wanted to put in something that doesn't fit. When you look at Brookline or Beechwood, those houses are all over the place. You got new homes, older homes, so I don't know how you can apply restrictions that are equal for all neighborhoods, so it's a little bit of a challenge, but I think it's something that this board would like to see incorporated into the comprehensive plan, so.
I think that would be great. I think that really, I mean, you're right, it's a challenge, and usually, each neighborhood is surveyed and character defining features identified and so on and so forth. But I think that at the nut of it is really just to build new buildings that fit in with the scale, massing, and character of existing. And that existing can be anything, even if it's varied. I mean, you can have new construction in a historic district that fits in, right? It doesn't mean everything has to be phony colony, but it has to fit into kind of massing, scale, materials, et cetera. So I appreciate that you're on board with that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that if you were to poll all 7 of us when we're here, I think the majority would favor some type of wording to that effect, so.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so
Susanna,
much.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no.
Would the Historical Commission be interested in putting together some sort of survey of recommended styles, materials, et cetera, for maybe not by street obviously, but maybe by neighborhood, just to kind of get us going on something like that, if that we could at least present to developers to say, hey, as a recommendation, these are the kind of styles that are available or that are already present in the neighborhood, if you could follow these, maybe not requirements, but guidelines, or these styles, or kind of incorporate that a little bit, I think that would be helpful.
I think that would be a pretty big challenge for us to do.
Sure.
I think
But just
that
as,
it may
as
be.
a long-term project,
No,
just
and
like kind of.
I think it's, the challenge is you don't want to be too prescriptive, right? There's a balance. And maybe, maybe we should just see if we could do some research on other zoning codes and the language in other zoning codes that, addresses this, kind of character issue.
Sure. But I don't think that that the Board of Commissioners is interested in creating a harb of any sort.
I wasn't suggesting
Right,
that.
no.
Yeah.
But so then it's kind of just left to me to figure out the, architectural style and character of the neighborhood.
Right.
So, maybe as a long-term project, and again, not like street by
Yeah.
street, not specific,
Yeah.
but, just a general idea, or, guideline, or,
The other challenge there, and this is a longer conversation,
Sure.
is then everything looks the same, which you don't really want that either. There
Right.
has to be some
Right.
room for
So,
creativity.
right, so if we're
So-
saying that, like, we kind of want, like, new development and new houses to blend with the neighborhood, I would like to, I would love to see, something more, visual and more concrete than,
No, I totally understand what you're
than,
saying.
just, based on my personal aesthetics, I don't want
Yeah,
to go on that.
no, I get it. But my question is, and maybe to you and to the commission is that, I mean, we already use zoning, right? We already say, talk about setbacks. Why can't we add language about massing, scale, materials?
Yeah, so if I can, that's often addressed through something called form-based
Right.
code.
Right,
Right, so there's kind of a more prescriptive style of form-based code, and then there's form-based code light. I think that we might tend towards the form-based code light, but there are ways that we can amend the ordinance. So this maybe could be something that we include, as a recommendation, is to consider these zoning changes in the future that's not the full-blown historic district with the harb and all
Right.
that entails,
right.
but to incorporate stronger zoning language akin to a form-based code that could then address exactly those things, like, so we have setbacks, but talk about massing, talk about projections, talk about, articulation, and maybe not get into material type or color schemes, but get into more of just the physical presence of the buildings, which is kind of key, I think, in terms of scale, thinking also too about garage placement.
Right.
That's a big one. So those types of things, I think, could be addressed through a form-based code approach.
I think that would be a great idea. I think that would be responsive, certainly, to what I've heard from the community. Although I do have to still plug for maintaining existing buildings, because that is what we do at the Historical Commission. But thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation. I really appreciate it. Thanks. And yeah, I'll follow up on that.
Thank you. Ma'am, would you like to comment on the comp plan? No? Okay. Well, it's not going to happen tonight, so I don't mean to disappoint anybody, but we have a lot of things to go through before we start our own dialogue, I guess. We received a lot of written correspondence from different groups and individuals, so I think it's only fair that we spend some time going through their information and see how we feel about them, or how the board feels about them. Yes, sir.
Fair for me to ask the board for comments regarding,
I'm sorry, if you could just,
is it fair for me, I don't know if you give feedback at this point, but is it fair for me to ask you what the board talks about with functional commercial for the West Eagle Road corridor? Whether the board feels that there is some challenge in making pedestrian-friendly a place with that kind of traffic volume? I mean, if you want to share your thoughts, I'd be curious just to.
Well, the thought with the steering committee was that if we could reduce the number of driveway cuts, okay, and that would be a big step moving forward. If we can move this as far as pedestrian accessibility, if we could move the sidewalk away from the curb and have a grass strip, that would help considerably. I think the goal is to try to make the corridor a place where people who live in the surrounding neighborhoods feel free to or feel safe to walk to those businesses. We're not suggesting that certain businesses go into those places.
The goal seemed to be, in fact, it describes creating a town center, so centered around Oakmont and the West Eagle Road corridor.
Right.
Wouldn't it be more appropriate to find a place where there aren't tens of thousands of people coming through?
Well, I think that
Brookline or something?
a lot of the input that we got was from Haverford Partnership for Economic Development.
I understand.
I don't know if you're a member of that group or not.
Yes.
Okay. So they had a fair amount of input and offered suggestions, which the steering committee believed made sense. The town center concept is they feel, and I think the committee feels, that it's a opportunity to create a location in the township that's a center of the township. Now,
But,
not so much a downtown, but where you could go and sit outside and listen to a concert or do some other activity on a weekend or things like that. Maybe close down parts of Darby Road for an event. That I think is the overall goal.
the argument also has been made that curb cuts, in fact, decrease traffic congestion because you have multiple opportunities for cars to turn as opposed to one car backing up traffic.
Now, I would disagree.
Okay.
As a civil engineer, I've been taught that the least number of conflict points you have, the better off you are. Okay, so every driveway is a conflict point. So if you have probably 50, 60 driveway cuts along that section of Eagle Road, that's potentially 50 or 60 places where people could have accidents. And the plan is geared so that the corridor is developed as a unit. Okay, for instance, each individual property owner can't come in and do what they want to do under the proposed plan. The idea is for either a group of property owners from one street to another, they form a corporation, decide to rebuild their entire block, with offices or commercial on the bottom, but it won't happen unless everybody cooperates within that group.
Right, I understand that.
So if someone in the middle of the block doesn't want to do it, then it can't happen.
Right.
But we all feel that something has to be done in that corridor.
Okay.
To be totally clear, Mr. Fullen, I seem to recall you were involved in the 2009 conversation, or, in opposition of the 2009 plan?
To a degree,
To a
sure.
degree, sure.
But we also made constructive proposals as well that we didn't feel were being recognized sufficiently.
Sure. So just to be totally clear, there is no eminent domain considered.
I understand
We're
that.
not,
I know.
we're not talking about any of that. We're
Absolutely.
not talking about forcing people to merge parking lots.
No, I'm not worried about that. I'm actually I'd like to offer constructive input.
No,
I'd love to make the place look more
I just
beautiful.
wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page. I
Yep.
know that you had concerns back then, and I just wanted to relay that, this is different than the 2009 plan.
I absolutely recognize that, but I appreciate that. Great. Well, thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Would you like to say something? No, yes.
Yeah, sure, yeah. My name's Dory Dowdy. I live in 2417 Rosewood Lane in Haverford Town. And I guess I've had a conversation with Kelly, and I didn't know anything about this until like the beginning of June. And we had, the COVID thing come, and I know that you guys started your survey back then, but getting this publication, and there are, I just got this the other day, I guess, and it has the Township Directory, and I looked through this, and it doesn't say anything about, the plan you guys put together, and I wish it could be more, like, it doesn't really even look
Oh, I
like-
can tell you why.
Oh,
That is
all
a
right.
fake newsletter.
Oh, is it? Okay, because your stuff is in there in the beginning,
Yes.
so, all right, well,
We used to produce our,
it's not? No, no wonder then.
our township produced newsletters through that company.
Oh.
When we opted to do it in-house, they continued to produce newsletters essentially under our name.
Without your-
With absolutely nothing that we can
Okay,
do
well, then
about
that
it.
takes care of
So I
that.
do
Okay.
apologize about that.
Yeah, well,
They are
it's
a
misleading.
giant frustration
Okay,
of
well, thanks
everyone
for
in this building.
Setting the register straight.
Yep.
So,
Oh, could you mention what is the title of that
it says
magazine?
Haverford News, Keeping the Community Informed, Summer of 2022, and Inside the Table of Contents. Haverford News, published by Franklin Maps. Yeah, well, I guess I'm not as informed as you're.
Franklin
telling me.
Maps was our previous publishing company
they
that
can't-
has just
can't get-
opted that they decided that they made so much money from the ads that
Oh.
they would just continue doing it with
Okay.
fake articles.
All right, well, I was snookered on that one. So I guess when I talked to Kelly before, like the legal section of the newspaper, I don't get the newspaper anymore, I'm not sure anybody is there any way to let a lot of more people know, like, as this progresses, and maybe you've tried other things, but, I try to stay informed about what's going on, but I don't know how better to let people know, like, nobody, are you saying, but do you hear about the comprehensive plan? What? And no offense, but it's just not out there, and so I just,
I would disagree. It's out there. It's been out there for a year and a half.
oh, yeah, but you talked to I guess maybe I have a different circle of people that I talk to, so maybe your circle is different than mine. But I guess the only thing I have to say as far as what I've read through, and I haven't read it through every single nook and cranny of the plan, but I know through some of the PowerPoint slides. Number one, vehicular congestion, and number three was flooding. And I live right off of, I guess, a stone's throw from the head nut from Harford Road in the Merwood Park section, knowing full well on Winfield Drive, having relatives that I used to visit back in the 70s when there were cars floating down the street I live on right now, and just, so that was in 71, there was a storm, and then in August of 2020, there were inflatable rafts that were actually used to rescue people for that storm there, so I'm thinking, whoa, I hope they're still going to address that, even though I know it has been addressed, but there still seems to be problems that water flooding. My aunt, who's no longer there, her water never got maybe up to 2-3 feet, but I was hearing people up to their first floor from that creek. So I'm not affected by it. I'm up the street, but I'm seeing the horrors that go through. And then the vehicular congestion, that's the second thing for, traversing. It's not just Eagle and Haverford, maybe Township Line, Westchester Pike, some of those areas, they do get really congested. And the thing that concerns me is I know to develop, the redevelopers would need to have maybe some third, 1 and 2 and 3 story high apartment. Doesn't that add to the congestion too? So I don't know how you balance all that, because I know it is a balancing act, but it seems like there's something that has to give it for something else. I'm concerned about the congestion and still the flooding that isn't seemingly addressed completely, but maybe it's not possible.
You're aware that Township is currently doing another flood study for that part of Winfield?
No, again, I'm
Okay.
an
They are.
uninformed constituent,
As a matter
sorry.
of fact, they just approved a change order for, what, $50,000?
Right, so they approved a study that was done by a consultant that they had hired a while back for Winfield Drive, Cherry Lane, that area,
Yeah.
to address the flooding issues and to seek different remedies on how to properly address that, or at least further mitigate the issue, because we are very aware that there is a problem there.
Yeah. So I guess I wasn't familiar with how that intertwines with the comprehensive plan. It is mentioned, but I'm not sure. And it is a higher level plan to oversee like 10 or 15 years out. So, but thank you for informing about that. So it's thought of. Okay, great. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for straightening me out on this one too.
Okay. Since we last met, I forgot to mention this, we received additional written correspondence from the Haverford Township Historic Commission, the Haverford Township Civic Council, and Mr. Joshua Dupuy. And I think I forgot to mention last time that we also received correspondence from the Bromford Civic Association. So there must be I don't know, a dozen different organizations and individuals that have written, and I thought it'd be best if we could go through each of the documents that we received and take a look at them and discuss, see if we feel there's anything in there that merits further consideration with the comprehensive plan, or if there's something in there that's been covered by the plan, but maybe needs to be clarified in the plan. So that's my thought for tonight, if you guys are up for that.
If the commission thinks it's appropriate, what I would like to do, since we have been reading those comments in their entirety during the meetings, is maybe taking out the personal information and posting them on the website. Yes.
Sure. Although I don't know why you have to take out the personal information.
I don't
People
want,
come up
I don't
to
want
the
people sending them
podium
angry.
and-
I don't want people sending them angry emails.
No, but people come to the podium and give their name and address, and it's broadcast on TV.
Yeah, but they don't
What's
get their
the
email
difference?
addresses.
If you have something to say, why hide? Okay, so in no particular order, I'll start with the one that correspondence I have on top, which is the recommendations by the Historic Commission. And as I mentioned, I don't know if you folks had a chance to see that or read that. That came in today, yeah, but.
I have not had a chance to read.
Okay, all right, well then, let's not do that right now, but basically, they're offering to rewrite that section of the report of the comp plan. And in my opinion, I think they should have been consulted from day one in regards to what that part of the comp plan should say.
Do we have someone from the historical commission on this?
We did,
Yes,
Saying yes.
we did.
yes,
It
we did.
was,
I probably should not have assumed that there was consultation. But I think we all may have been under that, or thought that. So,
Well, regardless, it makes sense to pay attention with the historical commission. And I also thought that since Jack Garrett is our representative from the planning commission to the historic commission, and since he's not here tonight, I thought it'd be a good project for him to take this under.
Okay. The only comment that I would make regarding having outside groups rewrite sections of the comp plan, even though I believe that rewriting of certain sections are certainly warranted, I'm just concerned about the change in writing style and tone, kind of the approach. So it's just, there's already one section in the comp plan that was clearly written by somebody else because the change in language is so dramatically different from the rest of the plan. So I don't know how we kind of coordinate that in terms of, if you write it, then maybe, I don't know, somehow try to normalize it so it's not like a patchwork of somebody wrote this and another group wrote that and somebody else wrote this and then kind of glommed it all together and called it a comp plan, because that just seems kind of like a patchwork. So just however we do it, just to normalize the writing styles and language to the best we can.
Okay, so we would use the historic commission's as an outline, say, and work it into the text in a fashion that's consistent with the rest of the comp plan.
Yeah, I guess this is, I'm not sure what the budget is at this point for the consultant to continue making edits. And so at this point, that might just be a broader question, maybe for staff to weigh in on how much we are going to be using the consultant for any potential rewrite. Just because I don't know kind of where we are. This thing has dragged on for longer than anticipated because of the pandemic. So kind of, I don't know what our timeline is to have the consultant continue working on things and what the budget is, because I'm sure we've maximized the original bid proposal.
sure. And the amount of meetings, which is why he's not here this evening. I told him to take the night off. I will fill him in. So that is something that I can certainly discuss with our finance department and, figure out if there's, wiggle room in the 2022, or we are in 2022.
23.
2023 budget to kind of move things around a bit. So that's a conversation that I can have with them and the consultant as far as how many rewrites we can kind of work in at this point, and where we can move on from there. But
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. Having it seem vastly different in language would be oddly off-putting while going through the comprehensive plan. But I also think that their comments should be, uh, you know, further incorporated.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, and especially as we get more into kind of planning commission comments, speaking for myself, there's definitely sections and some kind of wording choices that I would like to see improved for clarity, and execution from an implementation standpoint. Um, and certainly any kind of going back in and making those changes is going to affect the writing style. So,
Sure.
so I just want to make sure that it's cohesive enough. But also, I feel like edits are going to improve the outcome, and that's also more important than having completely consistent writing styles throughout, maybe.
Absolutely, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on, the next piece of correspondence I have is from the Haverford Township Historical Society. It's a two-page letter from Kate Clifford. You folks have that?
I'm sorry, which one is this one again?
Historical Society?
Is it in the big packet?
Was that in the package you gave us last time?
I believe it was.
Okay.
I mean, just you.
We could. Sorry about that. We were talking about the Phillies rotation for the next series,
It's a priority.
which is not very good.
No.
Okay, so anyhow, did you find your letters from the Historic Commission? Okay.
Yes.
All right. What jumped out at me was at the bottom of the third paragraph on page 1. They object to the township or to the comp plan making the statement that would maybe dilute how the historic character of the properties which are included on the historic plan are treated. I think the consultant's opinion was, it becomes costly for individuals who live in these properties to renovate their homes if they have to follow the exact architectural standards that were set 100 years ago or something for their windows or their roofs or things like that. Or there are products on the market today that look like the real thing but aren't the real thing. So the consultant was recommending that we loosen up some of those regulations. And I think the Historic Society is opposed to that. I don't know, Kelly, you would know better than us how much of a problem that is as far as individuals who come in asking for relief, I guess.
I can tell you that the bigger problem is when somebody is inquiring about purchasing a property that is on the Historic Resource Survey, and thinking that they're going to be held to, creating finding these specialized materials, and spending $1 million. Every historic commission meeting that I've ever been to, they have made recommendations of different types of kind of recreated or attempt at meeting that aesthetic, but not obviously using that material that may cost so much money. So I know them to be very accommodating about that towards homeowners. But it definitely is something when you look at the ordinance itself, that potential buyers are scared off of.
Okay, so the way it works now, someone who's in one of these properties comes to the Historic Commission and asks for relief, basically.
And ask for a recommendation for any exterior work that's done to the house,
Okay.
or the structure that's deemed historic. And then they provide a recommendation based on, what the materials they were planning on using. If they feel that there are materials that might be better suited, or may,
Okay.
reflect it a little bit better. And oftentimes the homeowners are really receptive and happy to have that kind of input. Kind of like, not like a free architect, design situation, but damn close, honestly. So yeah, despite the ordinance sounding very scary, the Historical Commission is very accommodating in my experience.
Okay, so I guess in a nutshell, is the system broke for any reason other than people may
Actually,
decide not to buy a property
if
because...
anything, I think that the language in the ordinance may be softened a bit, but certainly not removed.
Okay.
So my comment about this is this Angela, your language that this was the recommendation from the consultant, but what is that based on? And is that a policy direction that was recommended by the steering committee, which is why it ended up in the comp plan? Or is this his recommendation based on an analysis of our codes? Because the comp plan should be reflective of the policy decisions that the township wishes to pursue, not his interpretation and recommendations as a planning professional. I mean, his perspective as a planning professional informs his approach to this, but ultimately this is a reflection of what we, the township, want to pursue from an implementation and policy perspective. So, if the recommendation is to soften it a little bit, I mean, he's saying to get rid of it entirely, but it sounds like it's a helpful resource to provide education, and it's non-binding, and so it's merely there to protect historic resources and provide education to homeowners about what they can do within certain parameters.
So I think that the guidance that we have changed almost half of our elected officials during this process. So, so I'm not sure that all of the guidance that we're getting from the governing body is necessarily uh, been cohesive this entire time. And even then, you have very differing and polarizing opinions on the historic resource survey, on historic preservation, and on whether we should be regulating aesthetics. Um, so I think that, softening that language is kind of a nice middle ground. Obviously, I don't think anybody wants to, or I shouldn't say that. Um, Getting rid of it entirely, I don't think is the best uh, way to navigate things. Further restricting, I think, would further uh, impact people wanting to buy historic homes and wanting to, meet with the historical commission, have their recommendation and take that to heart. So, so I think, as a middle ground, it makes sense in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But the consultant may be also kind of dealing with multiple very different opinions as far as where to go with that.
Yeah.
The consultant basically reviewed the zoning code and made recommendations based upon his review of the code. So I would say this is something that more of his opinion as opposed to something that the steering committee directed them to do.
Yeah, so I just generally have a big problem with the fact that the consultant is the one who's been making these recommendations based on his analysis. That's a great first step for him to say that, but then the actual recommendations for implementation should be based on the policy directives guided by the township and our committees and consultants, or, our committees and all of the groups that work in the township. He doesn't, respectfully, he doesn't work in the township. So I think that that's, and this is not the only instance within the comp plan that I see a kind of planning perspective being imposed as like, this is a recommendation that the consultant is recommending, not this is the township's desire to see this end goal, and here's the steps that we can take to achieve that. So I think that this is representative of some of the conflicts that we have in the comp plan in terms of how it's written, because I don't think that we should then be adopting a plan if it doesn't actually reflect what the township wants to see. This isn't the consultant's plan. This is the
Certainly.
township's plan.
In this, and I will say again, in this particular section of the comp plan, the consultant has been probably likely, or actually definitely, been getting polarizing opinions of where he should be going with it because of the change of elected officials, varying opinions from elected officials, varying opinions from different groups, etc. So, so I'm not sure that he may have necessarily been sure what the township's stance was, because I'm not sure that the township knows what their stance is.
Yeah.
On the whole at this point, because of the change of the guards and whatnot. So
Yeah.
that may be the confusion there. I can't speak for the other sections.
So it seems as though we feel, at least the four of us feel, or I'm saying four of us, I'm assuming everybody agrees that the language in the ordinance should at the most be softened, but not significantly changed. Or changed at all. I mean, we can make the recommendation the way we feel is best.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about what goes on in the township and how these people, what's involved in this. I know that to recreate what was done back in the early 1900s is expensive.
Yeah, I also don't want to, I just want to be mindful that we're not going to get tripped up tonight and kind of going into such a deep dive on every single specific thing. I think, again, my comment is, broadly speaking, these types of recommendations need to be written in a way, like, I don't know that I want to sit here and say we're going to take each recommendation kind of point by point. because yes, I think if we're gonna take this one specifically, then yes, we would want to kind of recommend that it be rewritten to say what we actually intend as what we're gonna have happen. Um, I think we're gonna be here for the next 48 hours if we're gonna go point by point. So I think broadly speaking, I mean, the recommendations should outline the ultimate goal and not kind of be as specific in some cases. I want to be concise about what I'm trying to say here, but I'm having a hard time, just because the there's so many like oddly specific things and yet things that shouldn't be as specific are very specific, and things that should be more broad or things that should be specific are kind of listed broadly. And so it just kind of creates some confusion about what actually the implementation is and what the policy goals are. And I understand that there's been a turnover in the elected officials, and I respect that. But maybe then the comp plan just makes recommendations to continue to monitor instead of saying we're going to take one direction or another. I think it's okay if we kind of pull back then a little bit to say we should continue to have these conversations and monitor the impact of the, historical elements and use the, like, what is the actual problem on the ground. So using the real life examples of property owners who come before the committee experience, these, I don't want to say hardships, that has a legal term to it, but experience these concerns and find this valuable and find this restrictive, and, we like the way that it is because it helps to keep everyone on track, or we want to make other changes. I don't know. I just feel that I'm not comfortable right now kind of making a recommendation for changes to the comp plan specifically based on this, but more just a general comment about needing to have the comp plan make broad guidelines that we can then implement, if that at all made any sense to anybody.
So your opinion as far as the comp plan goes is that it gives us broad direction, but not so much specific direction, unless there are areas where we want it to be specific.
Yes.
So,
And also, I heard Maggie say sometimes it's way too specific when general goals and general implementation guidelines make more sense than either very general statements like the environment is, I'm making this up, but that the environment's important, that's good, or we should have flowers on tree
Right.
poles. You have those two extremes.
Right.
And I think I concur with Maggie's comment that the tone throughout is a planner saying, here's some good planning ideas, as opposed to the Haverford Township wants to do X. That makes sense? Which all leads me back to Maggie's question about what a step would be in terms of rewrite. So maybe don't know that answer tonight.
no, we don't know the answer tonight. At some point, we can say, we feel this section regarding, historic properties and historic preservation and things like that. We might have general comments that we don't agree that the wording in the current code should be changed.
Just
We
a
can-
couple
let me
things.
finish.
I'm sorry, you're done.
We can say that, we need to address the issue of infill. I relate that to neighborhood stability, protecting historical areas or historical neighborhoods, whatever you want to call them. I think we can make those two general statements as recommendations and let the Board of Commissioners decide whether or not they think that's appropriate, or if they feel the language that's been presented is okay as written. But I don't think we need to worry about, I shouldn't say this. I think we have to be judicious in how we say things. We don't want to end up rewriting the whole book, so. But we're entitled to make our recommendations. That's what they asked us to do, so I think that's what we have to do. And we'll have to come to a consensus among ourselves how best to do that.
Yeah. So maybe, okay, so going back to Angelo, your recommendation that we kind of go through each of these comments. So I think what I would like to suggest is instead of going through and saying specifically within, we want to take this particular thing, maybe we should kind of speak more broadly to the broader points that each of these commenters are making, as opposed to make specific recommendations for text changes. So I think as a whole, I would agree with this letter from the Historical Society in that I agree that the statement about that particular section should be readdressed to better reflect the actual policy outcomes that the township wishes to see in regards to historical preservation, and that it does seem that there is a good function and intent of that group. So I would then say that we agree that there should be a correction to that. I don't know if we want to say what the correction is, but I think that we would agree with the commenters' intent and meaning.
Okay, I guess the only other thing I'd like to say is that, the consultant has given us a recommendation based upon his opinion. And it appears as though both the Historical Society and the Historic Commission may not necessarily agree with his opinion on that matter.
Mm-hmm.
And based upon what Kelly told us tonight, the system seems to be working okay. People come in, they show that they have a hardship for whatever reason. They get relief, or they get a recommendation from the Historic Commission. They go through the Board of Super Commissioners, and the commissioners say, okay. I assume they say okay.
So generally, we actually kind of circumvent quite a bit of that process that is in the ordinance, which I think might be what Charlie's main goal, I'm sorry, the consultant's main goal is with talking about rewriting the ordinance. If somebody comes in for, needs a new roof and they apply for a roof permit, it triggers that it is a historic resource. They're then, forwarded to the Historical Commission. Historical Commission meets once a month. Assuming that, it's a roof, the Historical Commission makes a recommendation that evening, we then aren't going to make them wait another month, possibly 2 months, to go before the Board of Commissioners for an approval because it's a roof, and that's insane. So I think that that kind of language is what needs to be addressed. We're not talking about the actual demolition of a full building that's a historic structure, which obviously would go before the Board of Commissioners. We're talking about the demolition of architectural elements of a house that are necessary for a homeowner to get, within reason, like roofs, windows, things of that, possibly siding, things of that nature, where making them wait 3 months is just out of the question and not appropriate. So those things.
But this is where then it's kind of somewhat inflammatory, right? Like if that's what he intended, it's not very well expressed. So maybe the better thing to do is to have a brief explanation of current conditions. Is it working? And this goes for literally everything in the comp plan, but like what's happening now? Is it working or not? And then if it is working, recommendations to continue it or to make it even better. Or if it's not working, then we need some policy directive on how to change it. So if the intent to change the ordinance then to soften the language, right, to avoid the types of historic preservation regulations that would regulate routine changes to a building, because we're trying to avoid this unnecessary delay for nominal changes to a building, then don't write it in a sense of, this isn't important, want to take this out. Write it in a sense of, because of administrative, whatever, like these specific 2 sentences, explain it properly, give a policy directive for how to change it, but don't wordsmith the ordinance in the comp plan. Just make the recommendation to amend the ordinance to accommodate an improved administrative process for processing these permits, or whatever the case is. Just make the recommendation fit the actual thing we need to solve.
So we're talking about streamlining the process for routine changes to a historic building.
That's what it sounds like is
Yeah.
the actual problem
That's
that
the
we're trying
problem.
to address here.
All right. So we could make a recommendation that that wording be changed so that the process is streamlined for these cases, as opposed to throwing out all the requirements for roofs and windows and things like that.
Sure.
Okay. That was easy.
Okay.
And that's what the recommendation of the
Well,
township
that's-
is. That would be
Yeah,
what we're
that's
urging the
what we
township
would-
to adopt.
Our response would be along the lines that, the township not change the requirements, that they change the process. They streamline the process for these types of improvements.
Which is frankly something that we've done internally, but just
Yeah, I mean, we just want to
needs to be
make
reflected.
legal what they've been doing illegally
Correct.
for the last couple. I shouldn't say those words on TV.
We like to make it legal.
Yes.
Just have your policies and your ordinances reflect practice.
Correct. Right.
Okay. All right.
But also, I think Maggie's saying the plan is not it's a constitution or a blueprint. It's not
Exactly.
detailed. We don't rewrite the code.
We've been
Right.
saying that all
We go to
along.
the commissioners and say, here's an idea, and the commission decides, the Township of Haverford commissioners are going to review this and come up with a
Right,
change in
and-
the code to do X.
And that's what I accidentally interrupted Angelo to say earlier, is that that was a question that was brought up to me at the commissioners meeting on Monday night, is that the comprehensive plan isn't meant to be a site specific, this is exactly what we're going to do, this is exactly what's going to happen here. It's a guidebook of what we would like to see happen in areas, because most of the township is fully developed, and most of the township we don't want to see real change in. That's why there are certain things that are a little bit more specific, maybe too specific or not specific enough in certain places. But it's not meant to be like they don't make comprehensive plans like they did in 1988, where there were and this has been a criticism that I've been hearing a lot about different, having every single neighborhood listed and different recommendations for every single neighborhood that's described. Most of those things we want to keep the same, which is why we're not going for everything on the whole and just really focusing on the issues and the problems that were called out in the workshops, in the surveys, people that we've been hearing from with their public comments, et cetera, from the steering committee. And that's why those areas are a little bit more focused, and it's not neighborhoods specifically like you saw in the 88 plan.
So real fast to that point, the specificity of the changes to the zoning code, I think, is so inappropriate to put in the comprehensive plan.
They are absolutely something that will be dealt with when we redo the zoning ordinance. Sure.
Well, the fact that the comp plan is trying to legislate the zoning text changes and the zoning district changes through the plan is wholly inappropriate. I think, again, this is where we should say something like, these are the concerns that we have about the zoning districts as they currently exist, and the recommendation is to then, again, streamline, update the zoning districts, but the fact that the comp plan goes through and articulates kind of oddly specific things, like particularly in the Bromford neighborhood, which is part of the reason why I think that the Bromford Civic Association is up in arms about this, because it targets our neighborhood very directly in an oddly specific way.
which was truly a knee jerk because of the amount of comment and participation that we received from Bromford during the workshops and the surveys and the comments. It was a giant majority of all of those people who attended those things or participated in any of those were Brentford residents, and it was attempting to take their comments and apply them.
Yeah, again, I just feel that the specificity with which the comp plan makes recommendations for changes to the zoning districts and zoning text is too specific for what the intent of the comp plan is.
Sure.
Angela, I had one other comment on the Historical Society. So this is on the second page of this letter, the second full paragraph. So the HPP does not mention the Haverford Township as a certified local government or mention the Historical Society, and only briefly mentions the Historical Commission. And then it goes on to say, the map and key in this section are both out of date and are not best practice. I don't know who Rich Kerr is or why the list and map would be used. And then all individual names should be removed from the list. I would agree with that one, because the map has like the names of every single property owner. I believe it does.
Okay. Rich
So-
is on the Historical Society.
Okay, yeah, so,
Steering Committee.
okay. Because I know we just adopted new properties onto the historic resource last year, was it? So I mean, whatever that most recent list is, should be what we use. But again, going to the, like, there's either very specific things or very general things, and the fact that the comp plan doesn't even, again, talk about kind of the structure of the organizations that operate in the township that address historical issues seems like I would agree, it seems like a major omission, so I would agree with that comment.
Okay.
Which comment is that?
That's the second paragraph on the second
Paragraph
page.
on the second page.
Thanks.
Okay. The next one on my, that I have is from the Bromford Civic Association. The 2-page memo. You guys see that one? It's got bold print all over the place.
Yes.
You have it, Julia? Yep, okay, all right. So, as I mentioned before, we intentionally did not go through a neighborhood by neighborhood analysis in this comprehensive plan. We felt that from a residential standpoint, the neighborhoods were pretty much the neighborhoods that existed 30 years ago. I mean, Brookline's still Brookline, other than infill development, they've pretty much stayed the same. There are changes that have occurred, I guess, in the perimeter of those neighborhoods. Some businesses have changed. There's been some new development, but we didn't feel it would be appropriate to use resources that could be better used for other purposes. That's why we don't have a section for each neighborhood. That's why the comp plan did not focus on that. In the third paragraph down, there's a Bromford group suggests that the goals of the plan should include the preservation and enhancement of the township's residential neighborhoods. And I think the best we can do with that is try to implement some of the restrictions we talked about, preserving the historical character of neighborhoods. I don't know what else we could do specifically that would apply to all the neighborhoods in the township and not just one or two. I think we have to be judicious in our recommendations so that they apply throughout the township.
And
Not-
again, that's where I think having something like a form-based code, the recommendation to consider ways to protect neighborhoods in the event of infill and redevelopment could be through something like a form-based code, which addresses more of the massing and cadence of the street better than basic zoning can.
Okay, so the next point they make out is they felt that the plan is not, it's hard to follow, I guess, is the best way to do it.
Can I go back to the first one for a
Oh,
second?
sure.
I think, I'm not sure what the goal of that first bold is, but what this and other comments have said is, I think people are looking for something more about neighborhoods. I don't think it has to be like the 1988 plan with sections for each neighborhood. But maybe when there are specific problems or issues from a neighborhood, they can be worked in. Let's say walkability or circulation of people is discussed generally in the township. The examples that are issues in Brookline or Brentford or whatever can be incorporated there. But I think more important, from what I'm hearing from the comments, is we'd like to see more of a general statement of how important it is to preserve the neighborhoods and maybe some general ways that can be implemented, not neighborhood by neighborhood, but throughout the township. And I don't have that draft tonight, but that sort of
I mean,
goal. People
Yeah,
felt
to
that
me-
was missing.
all right, to make a general statement is fine, but I don't know what that entails. I wouldn't know what to say about preserving the township's residential neighborhoods. I mean, other than to control how infill development occurs. I don't know what we could say that in the comp plan that would meet that goal.
I think that people just want to see that it's recognized. And frankly, this kind of goes back to kind of state what the current conditions are and then say what your policy goal is, even if it's just to continue to preserve, continue to kind of keep on keeping on, or here's some concerns. And I think the fact that we don't have something that says Haverford residents feel that their, neighborhood character is one of the primary drivers of their quality of life, and preservation of the existing community character is critically important for residents. Concerns about infill development and redevelopment that have changed the community character because of modern housing styles and different types of infill that's incongruous with existing community character is a major concern of residents. Therefore, the recommendation is ... And then, at that point, then we could say form-based code, light, or something like that. That's where the policy recommendation comes into play. And like all that, it tees it up. And that goes along with the structure, is that we tee up the recommendations. So we say, this is what it is. This is why it's important. Is it working or is it not working? And then here's the policy recommendation.
Okay, so that statement would apply to all neighborhoods.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be neighborhood specific, because I think you ask anybody in any neighborhood and they're going to say that their neighborhood is the greatest of all neighborhoods in Haverford, and they're going to be right.
That's right.
And it can apply everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's looking at the plan, that's a pretty simple statement to me.
I think so.
Okay, all right.
One thing I would like to add is when you're talking about, because a lot of the residents talked about walkability within the neighborhoods, and I think when you look at the neighborhoods, maybe you also take into account where people are walking to, because I think we've really only discussed like the Oakmont corridor, the Eagle Road corridor, but we haven't discussed some of the smaller commercial outcroppings that pop up here and there. And I know we're not getting into the parks, but I think that if you're just looking at a plan discussing walkability, that's something that, from a planning perspective and the pattern of all of the grids, that's something that comes up as important as well.
Okay, I mean, I'm okay with that. I mean, just as long as everyone understands, we're just not designing any improvement.
No.
And a lot of the comments, or some of the comments that we got talking about existing streets and walkability and things like that, it would be a nightmare to try to build a sidewalk, say, in certain areas.
Right.
You're talking about not having sufficient right-of-way, probably existing vegetation and utility poles and things like that that would just drive the cost of the project beyond what the township could afford. So we have to be careful. We can make it a general goal, um, and not get into specifics, but I think there are going to be cases where you would really like to have a sidewalk somewhere and you just can't do it.
Yeah, and I think that that's okay, but I think that at the same time, it would help, like Maggie said with the other issues, if we explained the problem, then explained some of the hardships, and then, or explain the problem and leave it upon people to present the hardships. And that's when it's, that's what the boards do. They review hardships and determine if it truly is a hardship.
Okay. All right.
So there is a current ordinance regarding sidewalks and curbs and things of that nature, that if in the opinion of the Board of Commissioners, there should be sidewalks and curbs and such things installed in such neighborhoods. There is a procedure for that. It is incumbent on the homeowner to install and pay for those sidewalks. And I think that that the commissioners and homeowners alike, or property owners, would probably not feel particularly excited to have to do that or want to make them do that. So there is a fine line of property improvements that are paid for by the township but are actually private property, which is what a sidewalk technically is, even though it's used by the public. So that's kind of in a gray area, but technically would be considered a private improvement generally. So if there was a grant or something of that nature where sidewalks were put in a certain area, that could be an option. But again, even then, some people could be opposed because of then there's maintenance responsibilities, snow removal responsibilities. So there is a little bit more to it than just let's install sidewalks here, but let's have the township install sidewalks here. So just wanted to add that bit of background knowledge. That's all.
But it's kind of like when you adopt a complete streets policy, you're not creating a mandate or directives to put sidewalks in anywhere. It's just a policy that you consider the needs of all roadway users if and when you ever have any sort of development. So if I can maybe piggyback, just keeping that walkability kind of as a goal, not saying it has to go in everywhere, because we know that there's certain circumstances where we don't want it, where it's not needed, where we need to focus our energies in some places more than others. So I think it's more a matter of just kind of keeping that as a goal, as opposed to directing it to happen in a particular location.
Sure. So the current saldo does say that sidewalks wherever the commissioners feel
Right.
is right. So
And I think by saying it in the comp plan, it then strengthens that when we have applicants who request that as a waiver, we can say,
Absolutely.
no, but the commission has adopted this, where we say, we're not just gonna grant waivers for that because
Sure.
you asked for it. We're gonna consider the context and make a determination.
Right. No, I'm sorry. My comment was more about a clarification to some of the other comments that we've seen from the workshops and not necessarily what was, I apologize if that wasn't
Oh,
clear.
no, yeah.
I'm just kind of talking out of context every now and again. So that's what that was more based on. More of I want to see a side. People saying I want to see a sidewalk from my house to this park, or from my house to this business district, and why that might not be immediately feasible. That's all. Yep.
Thank you.
If I could add, walkability can mean, or general safety in a community, and preserving a residential neighborhood can mean a lot of things. One thing might be sidewalks. Others, I'm not a planner, but off the top of my head, and I think it was in the Dupuy
Yep.
letter, speed bumps, stop signs strategically, a bridge over heavily trafficked commercial roads where people might want to walk, and where there might have been a history of accidents or deaths, et cetera. So I don't think we can, well, and sidewalks is a great example, because we've had that come before us, which is we have a mandate to put in a sidewalk when there's a subdivision, and then people say, but wait a minute, it's going to be it's the sidewalk to nowhere in a completely treed neighborhood. And do you want to get rid of all those trees that are important? So I think that's one where there's a lot of push and pull. So again, I'm not sure, well, we should decide. Should a plan say, this is what we think we should do? Or should a plan say, these are the issues and the township needs to make a priority out of dealing with those issues, because a lot of people have kids or just want to walk, and either with or without baby carriages, but they want to have safe, walkable neighborhoods. Whether that's under the heading of walkability or neighborhood preservation, the important thing I think people are looking for is a clear, strong statement of a goal that the township wants, and then possible ways of implementing it without dictating, put a sidewalk here or a bridge here.
I mean, just from a engineering perspective, I think speed humps are terrific as far as controlling speed and things like that. The only problem with Haverford Township is, you know, they have a set of regulations that what is it, 50% of the people on the street have to agree to it?
I believe that it is 50% of the property owners that are affected. I believe it's like on the block. But yeah, you'd have to ask the police department. I really don't know.
So if you have 10 people, 20 people live on the block and 2 people have a problem with speeding and bring it up,
And it's generally,
the other 18 could care less, it doesn't get done.
generally the person who, and actually Larry Holmes brought this up at a meeting maybe last month, that speed bumps, everybody wants to speed bump until it's in front of their house. And, you know, the cars are clattering right in front of them at, you know, all hours of the night.
You have, you know, real issues that, you know, we have methods of controlling or helping those issues, but we can't implement. It's a difficult thing sometimes. So, all right, so we're past that first part. Okay. And I think we all agree that the comprehensive plan needs to be redrafted in some respect, so it's a little easier to follow. And I think we, again, in order to preserve resources, I think we should focus on the section that talks about application of recommendations. I think everyone might agree that that's the area. I know when I look at a plan, first thing I look at are the recommendations,
Absolutely.
you know? So if we have a concise, well-formatted section of recommendations, say this is priority number 1, it should be implemented within a certain amount of time, or recommended that be implemented in a certain amount of time, and then just create a table like that, I think that'll go a long way in making the comprehensive plan easier to follow.
Yeah, so real quickly, people aren't going to read all of the text. They're just going to go to an implementation table. We do have a table. It does have some timelines, but I think we could come up with some sort of like executive summary that says, you know, if we kind of create more of a framework to say land use goals and economic development goals and transportation goals, and then just have a kind of broader summary of the major kind of overarching policy goals we have, and then the specific and then that's where the implementation table comes in with the specific steps for implementation and then the timeline. In my experience writing comp plans and actually implementing them, the timelines go out the window as soon as you adopt the thing, because it's like impossible to kind of budget for timelines, and things always take longer than you think it does. But I think that they're helpful for us to, if nothing else, then to prioritize, like, these are the critical things that we need to tackle first. And instead of putting timelines on them, it's just really helpful to say, like, this is first. And then honestly, it's such an iterative process. So one of the recommendations should honestly be, and I'm sorry to create more work for you, Kelly, but like a yearly summary of, these are the things we accomplished this year based on the comp plan recommendation. And so therefore, as we develop our work program for the following year, these are the things that we want to focus on.
I agree. Although I think it's good to have a timeline, at least it puts a little heat under somebody's butt.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying get rid of the timeline, but I think in terms of the practicalities of the timeline, I think having some sort of like year-end summary and then work program for the following year is helpful to keep the momentum going for the implementation, because this plan is only going to be as good as our efforts to move the recommendations forward.
Okay, the third paragraph, the Bromford group seems upset about proposed zoning changes. And again, I don't know that there's anything in those zoning changes that was directed by the steering committee. I think, again, it was a recommendation of the consultant, because some of it.
I will say that the consultant did make a recommendation to change the C4 zoning district to, I believe, C3. And my reaction to that was, oh my gosh, Brentford will be thrilled because it's such a less intense use and has less impact on the neighborhood or on the, you know, on those properties that back up directly to it. So I have to say that so if anybody from the steering committee did suggest or support that idea from the consultant, it was me. And I am quite surprised by anyone being in opposition of that, because it's less intense uses than what's currently permitted.
I think I was referring more to the clumping of the R4, 5, and 6 districts into one district.
I'm sorry, I thought we were talking about the change of the.
No.
That seemed
I was more
significant.
concerned about the changes to the residential zoning districts. And his feeling was, you know, one district has a minimum lot width of 6,000 square feet. Another one has a minimum lot width of 55, or lot area of 5,500 square feet. So what's the difference with 500 square feet? The difference is everybody that lives, whatever you change, someone's going to be affected. And it's going to require, in my opinion, more appeals to the zoning board for variances and things like that, which can be avoided if we don't make those specific changes.
So,
It will also create more non-conforming uses
Oh, yeah,
or
absolutely.
non-conforming
Yeah.
dimension, which will result in more variance or special exception or.
Which is
or
why
litigation.
you would likely, and again, I think this is probably too specific for the comp plan. But if that were the way to go, or that were the way that we wanted to go, by consolidating residential zoning districts, certain zoning districts are extremely similar in area and bulk regulations. R5 and R4, very close. The minimum lot area of R4 is 6,000 square feet. The minimum lot area of R5 is 5,500. The minimum setback is exactly the same at 8 feet. R4 also has an aggregate requirement of 20. So if you have 8 feet on one side, you need to have 12 on the other. R5 doesn't have that requirement. It's allowed to be 8 and 8. So you're talking about very, very small and likely insignificant changes if you were to downgrade all of the R4 to R5. You'd be probably creating much fewer nonconformities. Whereas if you were to obviously, you know, change everything from R6 to R4, you'd have a ton of issues. And I think that would probably be more appropriate, but again, maybe too specific for the comp plan and something we should address when we do the zoning map amendments.
yes, absolutely, because here again is where I've already said it, not to beat a dead horse, but the fact that we have such specific language about this district into this district and this district into this district, and here's the rezoning, and the fact that the zoning map is not a full zoning map, it's a generalized zoning map. That's ridiculous that we can't put the actual zoning map in the comprehensive plan. I know there's a lot of districts, but like put the frickin' map in. And then the proposed zoning map, again, you should not legislate through a comprehensive plan. So the comment here is there's a number of very similar zoning districts that, you know, that don't necessarily need to be distinct from one another. So recommendation is to update the zoning to consolidate zoning districts, and that's all worked out through the process where we rewrite the zoning districts and create a new zoning map. And that's done through the the public review process through the planning commission and then recommendations to the board, we shouldn't be articulating this as a specific goal, because what if we change our minds about something? Now we're gonna have, I mean, I know the comp plan is a guideline. And
I don't mean to cut you off, but am I misremembering? Because I think that it actually says, doesn't it say land use? Does it say zoning?
it says, well, it says land use.
Right, okay.
But when we asked about it at like 2 meetings ago, he was like, this is what the zoning districts are, but it's the same as land use. And I'm like, no, it's not.
So that wasn't intended to be a proposed zoning map. It was intended to be more of a grouping of land uses that were similar.
Sorry, it's called Draft 2021 Comprehensive Plan. I don't even know, like, that's not a map title.
Sure. And actually, I think that was something that was brought up in an earlier meeting that he said that he would revise. But that was essentially supposed to be a existing and proposed land use map, just grouping different zoning districts together that have such similar land uses that showing them separately would have seemed more confusing. We just were trying to make it a little bit more
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, every,
generalized,
Yeah,
but
I
I
mean-
see that it's confusing that way, sure.
but here's the thing. Every comp plan has to have a zoning map, a current land use, and a future land use. There's no way that we're gonna have, I mean, so the current land use should be literally a land use map with every single color for what the specific properties are. And it's kind of messy and jumbled, but that's what it is, but it's a snapshot in time, and it's helpful to look back on. So it should be a snapshot of what the actual zoning is in its entirety, and then existing land use in its entirety, and then the future land use, of course you consolidate. That's what you're supposed to do. So that's where you create those general land use categories, but you need to have it, like, the title needs to be correct, and the fact that he came to this meeting and said it's both is not correct.
I'm confused, though. Charles's maps do break down zoning into specific zoning categories, whatever he calls it, generalized unofficial zoning, October 2021, and a second map, and they all have low-density residential. They have R1, R1A, R2, MLD, MDR, so it has all the districts. And when I asked him about it, he said, well, I'll explain that more in this memo, and he provided a memo which is about what's going to be R1, R1A, R2, so it is a zoning, I think he's making zoning proposals, not generalized land use proposals for certain sections of the community.
Right.
And if I don't understand, maybe I don't understand what
the memo had.
Let me just finish my question.
Yes, sure, sorry.
I may not understand what a land use map or land use proposal is as opposed to a zoning map. So if you could clarify that for me, that would help.
Sure.
Maybe.
So a zoning map is going to go into very specific regulations, requirements, area and bulk regulations, setbacks, etc. Land use map is going to say what the actual uses of the properties are, or proposed, or kind of wants, for a proposed land use map of what you want certain areas to be used as. So whether it be low density residential, commercial, industrial, etc. So that's what the differences are, as opposed to a zoning map, which is saying this is what the property is zoned, and then having very specific regulations that correspond to that.
So David, imagine in a current land use in Bromford, we have non-conforming uses. So like the awning shop on Railroad. So all around it would be the color for residential, because that's the color for the land use for residential, which is yellow or orange.
But not R1, R2, R3, R4.
No, that's the zoning district. So the zoning district just says what uses can occur for that property. The land use is the use that is occurring on that property. So the awning shop is in a residential district, so it could be residential, but the actual use of it is a commercial property. So then the color of it would show up on an existing land use map as red for commercial. And then similarly, like the institutional uses in the neighborhood are in a residentially zoned district, but the use of them is an institutional use, so they would show up as an institutional color. But when you talk about future land use maps, you would essentially color the entire area of Bromford as residential. So even though the awning shop is there as commercial, your kind of proposed future land use is to have it as residential, because the idea is that we want to try to eliminate kind of non-conforming uses that are incongruous with community character. So if that use were to discontinue, then the policy goal for the future is that the land use would be a residential use. And then that's where you go in and you tailor what you want your future land uses to be. And then that forms the basis for, if you do have zoning changes, you can use that as a tool for future zoning district changes. But they're different. They're connected, but they're different.
That's helpful. So what you're saying is the maps that we have are not land use maps.
They are, but the generalized land use map is the existing land use map, but it's not actually the land use map because it's generalized, which means that it glosses over those non-conforming properties. So if you look at our neighborhood,
Which map?
this is the generalized existing land use 2018.
Okay.
And I'm just going to keep targeting our neighborhood because I know it the best. But if you see where Penn and Railroad come together, the awning shop is right there. That's all yellow. There is no, so red is commercial. So if you look at it, what this is saying is, because it's been generalized, because it doesn't take every parcel based on what the actual existing land use is, because it kind of groups them together as what the kind of average is for that street, but not the actual specific parcels. It should be, I feel like it should be the actual specific parcel by parcel land use. Doesn't the county create that?
I was gonna say, I can tell you exactly why that is, because the only report that I've ever seen for the entire township for non-conforming uses is for Bromford, and that is it.
But doesn't the county have GIS layers that has the land use?
And do I trust the county's, mapping
Is this from
system?
the county?
I always thought that this was, because it comes from the consultant. I don't know where he's getting his GIS layers from, but I thought the county offered those layers.
He probably I think he may have gotten it from actually our system. But our system doesn't have that either. As far as existing land use, as
But
whether they're non-conforming.
The county, though, keeps, like, the parcel data for the county keeps records on what the land uses are. So it's like the R10, the whatever.
Right, but it won't necessarily reflect whether that use is non-conforming for that zoning district.
Not that it has to reflect if it's a non-conforming. It just needs to show up with what the land use actually is. So there's no, like, special color for the non-conforming. So maybe I'm just spoiled from well, Montgomery County has land uses.
I was gonna say, you worked in Montgomery County.
Wrong county.
I'm sorry. Laura Marion has land uses. No.
They have a staff of 22 and they're.
I was just gonna say, do you know what I tell people when they say, well, Lower Marion? I said, well, then move to Lower Marion.
Well, Montgomery County has land use for every municipality. Every 62 of the municipalities in Montgomery County has full land use maps. So I just had assumed that they exist, and if they don't, then I apologize.
They do not.
Okay.
We're doing our best here.
Very good. Well, anyway, listen, I love living here. I still think that we should have a full zoning map. And I think that
It'd be absolutely easy enough to add.
Okay.
And I think that the future land use map needs to be better labeled and clearer in that these are future land use categories that we want to see, and that they are
Not proposed zoning districts.
not proposed zoning, that they inform zoning changes, but are themselves not what the zoning is intended to be.
Got it.
Okay. Moving right along. All right, so the next item in the Bromford letter is the draft plan's glaring omission of a discussion of the acute problem of non-conforming uses in Bridford.
Before we hit that,
Yep.
I just wanted to ask, are we saying now that there won't be the zoning changes that are proposed? We're at least in our next meeting, we'll consider
Right, that they,
deleting that, which will, I
It-
think
it
then that
seems
addresses
that-
the third area of concern of Brentford and others.
right. We're not looking to make zoning changes that would create nonconformities. Now, in the case of R4 and R5, I mean, is it a problem if we made that into one zoning
Some
district?
specifics
Right,
that are okay.
right,
But I think that addresses, if we're not going to have detailed zoning changes.
Right.
And that addresses,
It-
this would allow property owners to quickly and easily compare the status quo with the proposed changes. Generally not proposing changes. It's that concern. It's
and you know, when we get into the, I guess, final discussion of these items, it would be helpful to have our consultant here just to make sure that we're not misreading something or doing something, you know, that maybe doesn't make sense.
So with that comment, again, this is honestly something where we could just have a sentence in there to say, so that the problem is all these zoning districts, the recommendation is to streamline and, evaluate what the best course forward is for updates to the zoning districts in the maps. And then just touch on, like in that process, it needs to be considered that changes to zoning may create non-conforming, and that there's existing non-conforming uses, and not just in Brentford, but throughout the township, although apparently we're like hotbed of non-conforming. But just that, like, that's a consideration, like that should just be a policy consideration that we could potentially include as just a one sentence thing when we discuss the recommendation for updating the zoning.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that might meet the next one as well.
Yeah,
Not that, well, that's the next bold, but.
Right.
It was. Yeah, that next paragraph that starts, for example,
right.
and that goes to preservation of residential neighborhoods, because I think the gist of that is that there are a lot of neighborhoods in Haverford that have residential cheek by jowl with commercial development, sometimes broad avenues. So obviously, all the major thoroughfares, Haverford Road, sometimes in the small. And that's what Brentford comes in. It's an older neighborhood with more commercial sprinkled around the neighborhood. One of the goals, it seems to me, is preservation of neighborhood, and it's in the plan, different places around the plan. To have one section or one discussion about it's the goal of our township not to have, to prevent or discourage commercial areas from further encroachment into residential. Not a lot more than that, just something that's a goal. So when the commissioners think about what to do about Eagle Road, they take that into account. Maybe some specifics, but I think that's the main thing. You want to preserve a neighborhood, don't let it rot. Don't
Right.
let the borderline commercial development cause further rot within the residential streets.
I think, yeah, that comment could just be generalized to say, if the zoning districts are updated, consideration for the types of permitted uses needs to be considerate of the future land use goals for that community.
Which is another tension, because at the same time, the plan combining commercial and residential for apartments. And view of that. It depends on where, what.
Yeah, but that's a separate, I mean, that's a separate concern because you have residential and then you have commercial and then you have mixed use. So if you say this zoning district is appropriate place for mixed use, then that's where you have mixed use. But if you want residential, you know, singles, twins, duplexes, say that as part of your permitted land use. But, so I'm not disagreeing, but I just think that, to keep it general, to apply to every neighborhood in the township, it's, again, we're not trying to legislate through the comp plan. We're trying to just say that these are the considerations that need to be addressed when it comes time to actually making these specific decisions.
Okay, they go on to talk about problems with non-conforming uses in the Bromford neighborhood. There's some legal issues here. I mean, non-conforming use is permitted by law, and there's not much you can do from a zoning perspective to eliminate a non-conforming use. I mean, there are provisions where if it doesn't continue to operate for a certain period of time, it loses its nonconformity. But, you know, if it's a bakery and they move out and someone else moves in and has a similar use, I don't know that legally you can stop them from doing that.
You cannot.
So we have to be careful on how we, I don't know if there's any changes that can be made to the zoning code that would allow for more tighter regulations without becoming illegal.
The regulations that we currently have follow, I'm sorry.
I think the current code is fairly strong in its goals. As drafted, the zoning code says we would like to gradually eliminate. The policy of our township is to gradually eliminate non-conforming uses.
Right.
I think the most, and I agree with everything Angelo just said, it's not a matter of zoning, it's a matter of constitutional right to continue your non-conforming use, but you can't change it, and there may be limits on expanding it, or abandoning it. But the township has pretty good code to deal with those issues. I would suggest that the end result be that's a good example where we have a policy and we'd like to continue that policy and maybe consider in consultation with our township solicitor, the even strengthening of those provisions in light of existing law, because it's been there a long time, for lawful and gradual elimination of non-conforming uses. I don't think we can say a whole lot more than that because the law is complicated and fact-specific in the cases.
And you've already suggested some clarification to the wording in the comp plan, I believe, that the consultant agreed to implement.
And that's also to put it in a different place.
Right.
You know, it's tucked into a zoning description. It should be part of a discussion of non-conforming uses.
And the wild card in all of this is the zoning board, because obviously it's their directive to enforce the provisions of the zoning code, and, you know.
That would actually be my job. My job is
You're-
to
well-
enforce the provisions of the zoning code. But
You're the
the
first
zoning
line of-
hearing board does make, does allow for variances, special exceptions, et cetera.
But you're the first line of defense, Kelly.
Unfortunately, sometimes, yes.
But the zoning board has the final say in things, and
Has the final say in matters that are brought before them, whether it be appeals, variances, special exceptions, et cetera, yes.
they receive testimony, and lawyers can come up with all kinds of reasons why they should be allowed to do things that is convincing enough to get them through. So, like I said, the zoning board's the wild card in all this, and they play an important part on how things proceed as far as non-conforming uses. Okay. Next item is about safe, complete streets. Okay, pedestrian friendly, bicycles. I think things like that, if there's a known problem within an area, I think there's remedies available to residents to come to their commissioners and present those problems. And I think commissioners have the ability right now to make recommendations and suggestions to improve things, whether they be construction of sidewalks or changing the pattern of traffic, making streets one way, adding speed humps, whatever it might be. I think there's solutions available right now in place, and I don't know that the comp plan is necessarily the place to include things like this. Although I will say that if you couple it with, say, access to transportation facilities or public uses like schools or something like that, it might make sense if there's a glaring need somewhere, that it be identified as a glaring need in the comp plan.
Agreed.
Okay.
Chuck used to talk about, Chuck Reardon, about PennDOT. So one of the issues is figuring out what Haverford Township can do and what PennDOT can do, and where
There's
they
a
can
way-
work together.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a way to get around PennDOT too. I mean, we have elected officials in Harrisburg that I'm sure would support improvements if they're categorized as needed for safety or for other reasons, and there is a real need. So I think we could get support if, there are areas where those types of improvements are necessary. Again, it all comes down to dollars and cents, though. I mean, sometimes, you can't afford to do what has to be done, or aren't willing to pay the price, if you will.
This is slightly off topic, real fast. Do we know the status of the TCDI grant application?
Off the top of my head, no.
Okay, thank you. Thinking about specific projects for walkability, but, okay.
Okay, getting down to the parks and green spaces, I believe, and then we heard this a couple meetings ago, that the township is in the process of basically doing a comprehensive plan for its parks and open space. And I believe the township just awarded a contract
On Monday night, yes, we did.
on Monday night in the amount of $75,000, more or less, for a parks, recreation, and open space plan. So I would say that that plan would basically become the comprehensive plan for that particular need in the township. I mean, our comprehensive plan can't go through the detail that plan is going to go
For
through.
sure, no, we can absolutely incorporate it by reference.
Well, we may not want to do that. I think Charlie said at the last meeting that there might be legal implications that
Oh,
would maybe delay our comprehensive plan until that plan's completed. So we can make a statement saying that the township is currently doing that type of report, but not necessarily make it part of our plan.
okay.
And our plan can always be amended.
Sure. Down the line, it could be amended to incorporate that.
I do think that we need to be very clear, though, in our comp plan, because the MPC very clearly states that there needs to be a plan for open space and recreation in our plan, and the fact that it doesn't say anything at all is a violation, I think, of the MPC requirements for the comp plan. So even though we are going to wait for the specific recommendations in the new plan, we still need to say something in this comp plan to meet our MPC obligations.
I mean, there are recommendations for trails and
But they're housed in like the transportation section. I just think that again, this could just be like a paragraph because we're not making any specific recommendations. I think it could honestly just say, the township is embarking on a separate planning process for Parks and Recreation, but there's lots of really great, wonderful things, just like give a list of the parks that we have, and then just say, it's really important to health and open space and environmental protection, and just like, again, why is it important? What's the issue? We're addressing this in a future plan, and then at least we can check the box to say, we have addressed this in our comp plan, and therefore we meet the MPC requirements so that the state can't reject this
Sure.
for the county.
Right.
I would like to see, we currently have a requirement for open space or a fee in lieu of open space for new development. And I think it's, we don't implement those requirements very
Angela,
well.
have you been listening to what Maggie's been
So
saying this
I
entire
think-
meeting
I think it would be appropriate.
about not proposing specific policy changes in the comp plan?
However, I think mentioning that we do have a fee in lieu, no, from a policy perspective, that's really important. Like, this is where
I
we
was going to suggest
We don't want
upping the
that
cost.
anymore. I
Oh.
think.
I know him well
think
enough.
The ordinance, the way it's written, is not very enforceable. I think we need to revamp the entire ordinance in that regard. I think it's much better just to say, okay, we're going to have a user's fee. You build a new house, you contribute to the Parks and Recreation Department so many dollars, and every year that amount gets adjusted based upon the consumer price index. And then there's no question whether it's a new development or an old development, you got to kick in. Right now, I think there's a big loophole in the way the ordinance is written, and no one's paying that fee unless they don't know about the loophole. Kelly's not saying anything, so
I'm not sure that we should say anything like that in the comp plan.
you don't think we should?
Well,
We should look at avenues on how to,
I think, so again, if we do want to say something about this in the comp plan, then I think it should be something, again, with, here's what the current conditions are, here's the concerns about it, and a recommendation is that we should evaluate whether or not the policy and the fees as currently required and collected are servicing the goals of the township. And if the answer, and then we take that as an implementation step, and then we take a look at it, and we can have discussions about pros and cons. We can get into that later, but we shouldn't say in the comp plan that we want to scrap it or we want to do something else with it. But I think it should, if we want to bring it up as something, if you want to, Angela, make the recommendation that we bring it up in the comp plan, then it should be brought up in the sense of, here's a brief description of the program, and this is why we think it's working or not working, and that we want to
you sold me, Peggy.
refresh it.
I agree.
Okay.
Okay, so
I'm not saying I'm going to agree with it at all. I'm just saying we can talk about it.
Yeah, we need to say something about it.
Well, again, I don't know if you can tell, but my big thing is that we need to word things in a way in this comp plan that creates that framework.
Yep. We don't necessarily have to tell them how to do it.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think that covers the Bromford letter, unless anybody else has anything they want to add.
Now you should just like put a
How late?
tape of,
No, you're doing a good job.
sorry, I'm very wordy.
I think the key thing that's being asked for is a clear vision for Parks and Recreation in the plan. That's all.
Okay.
And then we'll have
Right.
this new committee deal with it. I also noticed that the new committee is adding representatives of the community, one of which is here tonight, to the advisory committee.
Oh, good.
So I think that's great.
So we can blame them when we don't like the plan.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, it's 9 o'clock. I don't know how long you guys want to go. I'm up for more, but I'll defer to you folks.
I'm good to stay.
You okay?
Are there any like key letters that we want to focus on?
Well, you tell me. They're all key, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I have to say that for the record. We have a letter from a gentleman by the name of Douglas Wolf, which I think focuses or is more concerned about, again, traffic and safety and pedestrian accessibility. And again, I think those specific instances for specific streets, there's avenues available currently within the township to try to address those concerns. Not to put Mr. Wolf off, but it's basically the same thing we just said about a similar comment from the Brentford folks. So I don't, again, want to dismiss it, but I think that if it's a big problem, the township should be made aware of it, and there's resources within the township to look into that. Does the police department still have a public safety officer or something like that?
No, they dissolved that position about 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
But Mr. Wolf has been in contact with multiple staff members about his concerns.
Good, okay. So,
Any of the specifics in Wolf that we want to look at?
well, I think it's he's concerned about Millbrook Lane.
So, yeah, I think
Where
this
he lives,
Yes.
you know?
kind of ties in with the discussion that we just had about kind of creating broader policy recommendations for zoning changes and non-conforming uses and updating zoning districts to include the types of land uses that you actually want to see in a community. I mean, related to parking specific. So some of the things that he raises are very legitimate and valid things, but they are kind of too specific and too neighborhood specific, street specific, for inclusion in a comp plan.
I mean, it looks like there's people park on both sides of his street. It's a narrow street. Well, maybe the answer is you don't park on both sides of the street. Maybe there's no parking on one side, you know?
Well, there's also traffic. There's a bunch of traffic planners, transportation planners, who will tell you that creating yield conditions like that is actually a benefit to public safety because, yes, it's congested. Yes, you kind of have to, it creates yield conditions where one car has to kind of pull over to let another one pass, but that inherently slows down traffic. So when we're talking about speeding, you know, why would you do a built infrastructure for speeding when you can just have on-street parking and it just inherently slows everyone down?
Right.
So,
Unless you're walking your dogs down the street.
so this is where I don't think that we should make, oh, yes. But this is where I don't think that we should be making any sort of policy recommendations in the comp plan related to this because it's a concern and it's a valid concern. But I don't think that this is something that we need to address through a comp plan.
Railroad is a great example of that. Railroad Avenue
And Buck
and
is very, well, there's only parking on one side of Buck, but it's very narrow.
Railroad, there have been people in the neighborhood suggesting, well, let's eliminate the parking near the polo field, for example, and let's make it more no parking. And I get frustrated because I have to pull over to the side, but I really don't want them to eliminate the cars because the parking. 'Cause
Right.
that forces me to pull over to the side. And if I don't do that, others will be speeding along.
Yeah.
And running stop signs more than they do already.
Yeah.
Along that same line of thinking, switching from two-way streets to one-way streets, same idea. You're creating a wider street for people to go faster. When the intention of that request is to create, speed and traffic mitigation, but it would actually do the opposite. So yeah. So
These are things where, like when Angelo said before, the neighbors get together and they say, this is what we really want, and talk to their civic association and talk to their commissioner and make a case to the commissioners to do something, whether it's bumps or one-way or two-way or parking.
Humps,
That's
no
how it gets
bumps.
resolved.
Yeah, humps, no bumps.
And, but not the plan.
Okay, next on the agenda here is a letter from, or an email from Gail Lovett. See, it's a one-page email. I hope you guys have. I think her focus is, there's basically nothing in the report regarding parks and recreation. I think we've discussed that. And we agree that something has to be said in order for the plan to be in compliance with the MPC. And we talked about how best to word that, so that we don't get too specific about an impact fee.
Yes, I think we've already addressed this comment through our previous discussion.
Okay, great. You're taking all these notes down, right, Cal?
Yes, I definitely don't have all these letters in my emails
Well, you gave them to us.
and a YouTube video of this meeting.
I'm taking notes too. Okay, which one is next?
Eric Hartman, who, surprise, lives in the Fifth Ward on Railroad Avenue.
You're in the Fifth Ward too? Where are you? I'm Penn Street too.
Okay, so he's looking to make Haverford more bicycle and pedestrian friendly, okay, with safe connections between residential areas and stores, schools, parks, and trails. I think the township has a pretty decent trail system within the township. There's trails that I didn't even know existed that are there. But again, I don't know how much we can do from a comprehensive plan standpoint to incorporate specific projects, if you will.
I mean, if we didn't have any specific projects articulated within the last 2 years, I don't know that we can go back and necessarily add them in at this point. But I think, again, this document isn't set in stone. So if projects do come up, as long as we establish the framework that our goal is that this is important to us and we want to pursue projects when they become accessible to us, then that should cover us from like a grant writing perspective. We can point to the comp plan to say, this project deserves funding because it achieves this goal that we set out in our comprehensive plan.
There is something in his letter, which, might make sense. He talks about developing safe crossing opportunities from Millbrook to the Norristown high-speed line. Now, that's something that makes sense from a transportation standpoint and things like that. If people in the community, it makes it easier for people in the community to use public transportation, then it's probably one of the goals that the comprehensive plan would aspire to.
And I think that the plan does kind of talk about some of those transportation challenges. But I mean, I used to commute to Norristown and I would walk to the I would walk to the high-speed line and take the high-speed line to Norristown. And it was great, but I encountered walking hazards all over the place. So certainly I think that the comp plan does talk about some of that stuff, but I don't think we can underscore how impressive it is that our township has so many great transit resources and that we really should be doing all that we can to enhance the access to them and encourage people to take transit for, I mean, every single reason. Gas is $5 a gallon. It's, just better for you to walk more and all the other reasons, congestion, everything. So I would be happy to even further kind of enhance that discussion and those recommendations in the plan.
Well, number one, I concur with encouraging people to walk. That we know from on Haverford Road, Ardmore section of the stations for the high-speed line and even the Bryn Mawr section to some extent, and the Bryn Mawr stop and certainly the Haverford stop. It's dicey to walk. In the winter, you're walking in snow. Anyway, safe passages, there's also, to encourage people to take the high-speed line, there's also the issue of the institutions and office buildings. So there's a fair amount of workers at the two nursing homes, one assisted living, who at all hours, they're not necessarily late night train hours, but during the day and evening, are crossing Haverford Road. And that's a serious danger. So from a safety standpoint, it's also important.
Right, right.
So I just pulled up the pages that discuss the transportation section. And so it is mentioned, but it's more just like a listing of the transit stops.
Right.
But again, there's not a very strong kind of policy directive for recommendations related to transit. So again, it could be something as simple as transit is critically important because XYZ, all the reasons why transit is important. And, we should be taking efforts to improve access to transit stations, bus stops, bus shelters, wherever possible. And like the township should continue to pursue opportunities for grant funding to make these things happen or something like that. Again, because comprehensive plans can be so critical in leveraging grant funding. So we really should be articulating that where we can. And again, we don't have to say specifically, we want to see the sidewalks improved on Haverford Avenue to get to the Haverford high-speed line stop. We know that that's what we want. I mean, that's what the TCDI grant is right now. But so we don't have to say that necessarily specifically, but we could even be broader, which will be less effective than if we had a specific project in mind, but still much more effective regardless as we pursue grant funding within the next 10 years.
And we do have comments from SEPTA, and I think they speak specifically about certain comments within the report that I guess they feel affect their operations. So maybe we need to incorporate some of the ideas that SEPTA has into the report to kind of blend in, kind of marry what SEPTA's thinking is versus what the township needs are.
Yeah, I think SEPTA made some good points in here, and they pretty much called out that some of the information was just wrong. So we should definitely make those corrections to have correct information. So I think pretty much all of the factual information that SEPTA pointed out that was incorrectly referenced, at the very least, should be incorporated into the plan.
Okay. All right. So I guess generally speaking, we need to incorporate what we need to from SEPTA's comments together with some of the ideas that Mr. Hartman raised in his memo.
I think his big concern also was bikes.
Now, yeah, bikes are hard. We have that development on Darby Road, and I mentioned the fact that, bike lanes would be nice along Darby Road, but it's just not going to happen, not unless you want to tear down every tree that's along the edge of the road there. And then what have you accomplished? You cut down a bunch of trees for a 200-foot long bike lane.
Well, I guess I wonder if there couldn't be bicycle corridors like a couple of our natural trail corridors where you look at, again, the one-way streets, but not to speed up traffic, instead to create dedicated striped lanes for bikes. And we could look at what needed to be connected with those. And again, we don't have to spell out specifically what's being connected in the comprehensive plan, but just state that it could be a goal to do such a study and find where it could be helpful to start making more connected areas. Because, getting kids to ride bikes to school, a lot of people aren't comfortable with that because it's rush hour in the morning and there's a lot of traffic. But if there were dedicated corridors you could send them down, then it would be easier. Or the same thing to get to the public transportation. You're not going to put a bike lane on Manoa Road, but you might be able to put it a couple blocks in and then have it be connected to Brookline or something like that.
What neighborhood do you live in?
I live in Penfield.
Penfield, okay.
I second that.
Okay, so I think we may have killed two birds with one stone there with SEPTA and Mr. Hartman. Any other comments on his letter? No? Okay. Let's do one more. And I don't think we have that many left. Of course, we're saving the big ones for last.
Did we hit all the ones in this packet?
I have one more from Brian Foley,
Foley, but I think his was
who
recent.
lives on Garler Drive. Garler is off Lawrence? Okay.
He calls the neighborhood Maryland Park.
Yes.
Like Garler, Josie, up that way. If you're coming down. Yeah, got it.
So this is just a specific trail.
Yeah. Connect this end of Havertown to the rest of our community.
So again, I think that this is kind of captured in the broader policy goal of creating connections from residential areas to park spaces.
Right.
So,
Or to existing trails.
right.
Okay. So I guess that wasn't too bad. You guys want to keep on going, or have you had your fill? Let's do Discover Haverford, only because I liked everything in the comp plan. They suggested some minor text changes, I think. I mean, they're fully on board with Eagle Road. They like the idea of a town center, and they support possibly future consideration under the Main Street program. And they've also volunteered to help in that regards. They do bring up a point about some way that the comprehensive plan could address support for tourism and hospitality establishments in certain business districts. And I think one of the things they mentioned is small hotels or Airbnbs, and we don't allow Airbnbs, do we?
We do not.
And that's because it's more than one family.
That is
Living under-
because we do not have provisions for short-term rentals within residential neighborhoods. We allow them within the C3, C4, and C5 zoning districts as motels and hotels. Additionally, our housing code requires inspections upon the any new tenant that is occupying the property. So even if we were to allow that in a single-family dwelling or residential district, other than the districts that I named, they would need to be inspected, which requires a scheduled inspection fee every time a tenant was changed. So that could be weekly, that could be daily, depending on an Airbnb. So, so for multiple reasons, that would not be permitted, or would be very difficult, even if it were.
Okay, and what does the township consider a short-term rent?
The PA Supreme Court generally made a ruling that it was about 6 months.
6 months?
So I'd say about 6 months.
Okay. Now, what happens like when we had the golf tournament back, what was it, several years ago?
The U.S. Open. Well, that was
People were renting their houses out,
sure.
weren't they?
In a situation where you're so overwhelmed with things that you just do not have the possibility to regulate, and zoning requires 30 days for an appeal or correction. That's all I have to say on that matter.
All right, so but basically you were just overwhelmed. Staff couldn't handle the onslaught of,
And it was within
influx
it was
of-
a fewer than 30-day period that
Okay.
it all happened. So enforcing something like that is nearly impossible.
Have the commissioners ever expressed or made mention of a Airbnb
Ordinance?
ordinance within the, no? Okay. I have a son that lives in San Diego, and every time we go out there, rather than live with him in his 2-bedroom house, we rent an Airbnb, and San Diego is in the process of, they're going to only allow like a limited number, like 100 Airbnbs within the town because they're getting so many complaints from neighbors about transients moving in for a couple days and
The
moving out.
transient uses is exactly why the PA Supreme Court made the ruling that they did, as far as allowing Airbnb or requiring townships to allow Airbnbs within single-family dwelling districts. But also, it contributes to a very, very severe issue with the housing market in specifically those areas. But also, I mean, we have, if you look at the prices of houses or property in this area, it's not really a whole lot better. So it just contributes to those issues.
Yeah, it's all the investors purchasing homes to rent exclusively on Airbnb. So it takes away housing from people who actually want to live there. So I have some specific comments that I think I will just type out in my more formal feedback related to some of the economic development things. Again, this is where I thought there was some like oddly specific recommendations about like different parking scenarios for mixed use developments. And so I generally kind of feel like I want to defer policy goals related to economic development to HPD. I guess, what are they being called now?
Discover Haverford.
Discover Haverford, and the commissioners. But in terms of how things are worded, I will just write my specific comments. I won't get into them right now because they're more specific to the things that were written as opposed to kind of broader policy recommendations for economic development.
Okay. So, who do we have left?
I think we covered some of. We have Josh Dupuis, but I think we've covered a lot
Yeah,
of that.
I mean, I think Josh is more concerned about his individual problem, I think.
But his also expresses something we covered, which is the preservation of the neighborhood
All right.
on the commercial development on Haverford Road. And bikes and pedestrians.
All right, which one is this now?
Josh Dupuis.
Dupuis. He spoke at our first meeting also. I'm looking for your letter. Yeah. I know I had it here.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
We got this one last week.
We got it between most recently, I think. Yeah. I'm sorry.
I have it up.
You have it up? Okay.
I didn't print it. I have it, the PDF.
All right. Just, I do want to mention that Rob Fioramondo gave us his comments. Julia gave us her comments, and Maggie gave us some comments also. So we have I'll kind of use that as a basis, as a starting point for whatever our final recommendations are. I know a couple of you guys have already met and started talking about things, which is great. So I think we have a good head start on this stuff, but I still think we need more time to go through and finish everything and get our thoughts together. And I want to do that with everybody here, as many people as possible. I know Jack has some specific comments he'd like to bring up. And I'm sorry, but I can't, I know I printed it out. So I guess bottom line is we're going to have to continue this discussion in August, which is, we meet the 2nd or the 11th. Okay. we only have one meeting in July and we have one meeting in August. So I suspect that in August, we'll have another meeting. Anyone who comes in and wants to address the board will be able to do so. And we'll take their comments into account. And then we'll continue our discussion on the feedback that we've gotten. I suspect that we'll get more written comments. And then, once that's done, then we'll start our internal deliberations. Each of us will give our opinions on what we think and hopefully at some point make a recommendation. I was hoping to possibly get that done in August, but maybe no. Maybe that's not enough time. We have a lot of ground to cover next meeting. I don't think we can do it unless we all agree to come in another time in August and have a special meeting just to finish this thing up.
For what it's worth, I'll be around all of August.
So will I. So,
I think I'll be probably away toward the end of the month.
towards the end of the month. Well, you can always come back
Labor
for
Day.
one night.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Because the fourth Thursday would be the 25th, unless we wanted to hold it on, I mean, if we're gonna have to advertise it as a special meeting anyway, we can choose a different date.
Yeah, we'll have to find out if there's any dates available where we can use the room. How much notice do you need to advertise?
Needs to be in a newspaper for 2 consecutive weeks, no more than 30 days, no less than 7.
Okay.
About a little, like 3 weeks.
Do we need that though for meetings? That's public notice, but I thought meetings you could do a shorter,
But that would be for like an emergency meeting, which it wouldn't be,
for a shorter time frame.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And we also have to, I mean, we're just going through the written comments here. We did have a lot of people who spoke and raised points that we haven't covered yet. So we still have to go through those too. So, I mean, it's up to you guys. I mean, if you want to have a special meeting, we can have a special meeting. We can establish a date now, or we can just,
Let's not establish a date now because I do not know what the calendar looks like. I'm
I
not
was
in charge
thinking-
of the meeting room calendar, and I do not want my my head on a plate for saying that we can have a meeting on a night that I did not run by anyone.
but no one would have taken the 26th or the 25th. Our regular, the fourth
You don't
Thursday.
have a fourth meeting,
I'm saying, that would be the special meeting.
but they could have given that room.
Oh,
given-
they really? Oh,
they-
okay.
It's possible. I'm not giving.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
not making any
Okay.
promises and saying
All
that
right.
they didn't.
Why don't you check the calendar and see, maybe you could email us and let us know some dates where we might be able to use the room. And then we'll compare that against our individual schedules and see if we can make it work. Is that okay with you
Well,
guys?
the person who is in charge of the meeting calendar is on vacation this week, so I'm
Oh.
going to allow her that and not bother her with a special meeting. But I will, we will do our best to coordinate that otherwise, because we do still have August 11th.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so we'll continue this discussion on August 11th, and I promise we'll get to your letter. I apologize, I can't find it. I know I printed it out tonight. This is fun, right? Yeah. We can tell by the large audience that we have how much fun it is.
I'm sure they're all tuning in.
Got rid of those other 3
At
people
home.
pretty quickly. Yeah, Phillies are off tonight, yeah, well,
Can we,
off every night, as far as I'm concerned.
are we adopting?
Do you want to, yeah, I was
Hold
gonna
it. We got 2 sets of meeting
say,
minutes
minutes? Yeah.
that we need to approve. I'll move that we approve the minutes from June 9th and June 23rd as presented.
Second?
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, you guys were all here for those 2 meetings, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's approved, and I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.